I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have is to create awareness by leaders that may not be aware of why Agile is relevant to them. And hopefully this talk can share a little bit of that in terms of you. And for the rest of you, shame on you for not getting a manager here. You had one job, right? So hopefully I'm not talking too fast. If I say something you don't understand, feel free to interrupt me. I do not speak Polish, and I apologize for that. But appreciate you listening to me in English. I'm not going to show slides. I'll do a few flip charts here for you as far as kind of how we go. Do we have a specific timing, Lucas, we're trying to nail here? So I got them all night.
More than 2 hours.
I got them all night. Awesome. No, I will not take that long. So we've all got probably better places to be too. So what I'm going to do is take you through three things. Okay, just three things. One is how I look at Agile, like why Agile is even relevant here. And I'm going to use the Stacy model. And some of you may have seen the Stacy model before, but if not, that's great. If you have, you might see it in a slightly different light, and hopefully that might be enlightening to you. The second piece that I'm hopefully to share with you is why Agile fails in most organizations. And you might understand, because I'm going to talk about leadership, it's their fault. It's only partially their fault, but there's a key aspect I want to highlight as to why leadership tends to get in our way in terms of agility in organizations. In fact, my background, I'm coming from the US. I'm from Colorado. Anybody visit Colorado? Any Colorado? Not yet. Yes, good answer. Colorado is a beautiful state in the United States, so you're all invited to come visit. And I've been training coaching for about 12 years, and before that, been a leader myself. And so I empathize with what it's like to be a leader in organizations. And I recognize the challenge in front of leaders. And so what I want to share with you then is really the main part of the conversation is the 6 key mistakes most leaders will make in terms of why it makes it so difficult to have an Agile transition effectively and why organizations struggle, et cetera. So that's the 3 things we're going to cover: why Agile, why it fails, and then some of the 6 key mistakes leaders make, and tell you a few stories along the way. Is that fair? All right. You don't have a choice, so I guess you could leave. So what I'm going to share with you here is starting point is the Stacy model. I don't know if you've seen the Stacy model before, but essentially it has 2 dimensions, what I call what uncertainty and a how uncertainty. So if you think about the types of things you build, typically in an organization, and I'm going to kind of draw a picture here of what it tends to look like. Most organizations, and when you're working on projects, I would say, goes something like this. Okay, now what does this mean? This means that in a traditional project management approach, what's the way you start? Besides the why we're building something, let's get beyond the why, let's get to the what. What do you start with in a project? What do you focus on? Requirements. Yeah. We have to figure out what we're going to build, right? And so we write the requirements and we solve a lot of that what first. And then we start maybe getting into the design, then we start getting into the testing and all the other kind of the how pieces. So this is a traditional way of considering risk management, right? Now, let me explain a little bit about the modes that are going on here. Now, as we get more uncertain in both what and how, we go from a simple system to a complicated system to a complex system to a chaotic system. And I've started our project up here under kind of complex to chaos because I think most projects start out fairly uncertain, right? We don't know what we're going to build. We don't really know how we're going to build it. And a lot of you, my guess is, who here works on software? Most of you work on software. Anybody working on hardware products? No? It's okay, some. Who here works in IT? Okay, a lot of you versus product development. Show of hands, some product development. What have I missed? So who's here totally different space? Who's here from like doing something totally not software or product related? Yeah, what?
Game design.
Game design. Well, that's software, isn't it?
Board games.
Oh, you're doing physical board game design. Oh, that is awesome. I want to talk to you. Okay. Media. Okay, so this could be physical media?
It is
Physical media, okay.
Media, films.
Films. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, my guess is game design, media, and certainly filmmaking are still creative enterprises. Is that true? Now, we got one over here,
I
Luke.
have a client in e-commerce.
E-commerce.
But
And
not the IT part, just
not-
the rest.
just the rest of it. So more like the fulfillment of
Yeah.
financial services and things like that. Okay. So let's focus. Let's just highlight the key difference here between complicated and complex. So who can describe to me how you would describe those two words? How are they different? What are they? Yeah.
So in Polish, I think they are not so different because they're some similar. But the meaning is that complicated is about the knowledge. So we need the expert knowledge. We need someone to tell us what to do, what are the connections. Someone more who has more experience with connecting the dots.
Okay.
And complexity is about our ability to predict the outcome, perhaps.
Okay. So I'm hearing basically you saying complicated requires a lot of knowledge, but something we could probably get our hands around. Versus complex tends to be a little bit more of that, I'm not sure how this stuff works together, right? So one way to think about that would be like a car, right? A car is fairly complicated, right? But if with enough knowledge, you could take it apart, put it back together, and still have it work pretty well, right? But take your, let's say, dog. Take your dog apart, put your dog back together. How likely are we going to get that, even with enough knowledge, right? Even with our best doctors, are we going to get that dog working effectively, right? We don't quite have that knowledge yet. So there's interdependencies in our dogs and cats and other animals and humans. We just don't understand how it all works, right? That's one way to think about complex. Now, another way to think about complex is take your projects or a film or your game design, right? Is it enough just to build a high quality product that meets your requirements, right? And get it out on time? Is that enough? Is that enough? It's not. What else do you need, Lucas?
Well, you need a customer who knows what
Yeah.
he or she needs, not what
Yeah.
he or she wants.
So you need a customer that accepts it. You need a stakeholder that says, hey, this is okay. I need a game player that says, hey, this is a fun game, or a movie go or whatever, right? I need somebody on the other side to say, hey, that's good. Now, I would argue that building the product, building the game, building the film is complicated. You might even consider it complex. But we can mission control that outcome, right? We can get that thing to happen. We can schedule it, we can design it, we can do it. But when you get to a customer wanting your product, when you get to a customer expectation, you cannot mission control that, can you? We can't set that. You have to basically get from them whether or not they like it or not. Okay, now let's take a look at typical project management here. Now, what tends to happen with typical project management is our projects tend to start out kind of looking pretty good, right? We tend to have kind of all the time in the world, especially the longer your project is. You got a year, you got 2 years to work on a project. You know, everything looks pretty good. Until what? What starts to happen? What's that? First deploy. We're not even there to first deploy yet. We just start getting into design. What starts to happen?
Change of the requirement. What do you do?
Yeah, well, that doesn't going to work. And by the way, I need something else. And pretty soon what happens is your projects kind of start to go, oh, we have some concerns, right? Until later when we start to say, oops, we got a problem, right? Now, this is my green, yellow, red. And typically somewhere in here we say, oops, we have a problem. We're not going to make our requirements on time, on budget, whatever that might be. But what happens? This is what we call a watermelon statistic. Green on the outside, red on the inside. Okay? Most projects run this way. They look great, and all of a sudden, boom, they blow up. Right? It doesn't work. Right? Because what are we doing? We're holding all of that risk of deployment, all of that risk of acceptance, all of that risk of the customer saying, hey, is this a good thing? Until the end. Right? So when I look at Agile, what is Agile? Agile is simply a different risk management strategy to get to the same result, right? So if we think about Agile, there's 2 words that I think about that primarily drive agility. Okay, word number 1 is what you might say is co-create. What do I mean by that? That means if our job is to meet the needs of a stakeholder, of a customer, of somebody, I have to do it together. I have to figure out with that game designer, with the film goer, with the, whatever it might be, with your IT customer, what do they want? And then the second word I need is iterate. So what I'm doing is I'm doing it over and over and over and over again to try to figure out, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Right now, what tends to happen in Agile projects is they kind of start out just the opposite. Why? Why are Agile projects starting out, we'd say, in the red? Yeah, in the back.
Maybe you don't have the whole implementation of something, and you can only show a little piece.
Yeah, we don't even know what we're building yet, and we're starting to build it? What do you mean? You're building requirements, you haven't even got all the requirements yet. How can you do that? How do you know when the project can be done? I don't know, we're Agile, right? You get all these comments around. Now, what else tends to happen? So we don't exactly know what we're going to build yet. We only have a small piece. What else is happening?
Lots of failed experiments.
A lot of failed experiments. We try a bunch of things. It's like, oh, the platform's not ready yet. We can't deploy that. Or, hey, we ran these tests. And usually those things are done way down here. And we've decided to do them way up here so they all fail. So you know what most leaders say? Well, this sucks. Let's throw Agile out because it's obviously not working because Waterfall worked great. Because it was all green at the beginning of our projects, right? So when we bring Agile in, it makes everything look bad. But if you actually do Agile well, right, we actually start to solve those impediments. We turn our projects into, some concern, but moving well, and maybe eventually we get our project to actually do something of some value to some customer and get it out the door. All right, so this to me is why we do Agile, right? Because I believe pretty much everybody in here lives in what I would call a complex world, not a complicated one. Now let's look at just the key difference. Think of manufacturing, I don't care, a pen, a microphone, whatever, right? We've spent decades solving a lean problem, right? Lean manufacturing, to lean out the waste and repeatability of producing a widget, right? That's what I'd call lean. How is your job different than building a widget? How's your job different?
You always have to do a thing that you didn't do before.
It's always new. It's always new, right? Every time you do something, it's new. It's not. So somebody say, why can't we just use lean management? Because lean management is solving a complicated problem like an automobile or a widget. That's what that was about. We're doing something different. We're doing what's called a creative factory, not a widget factory, a creative factory. You've got to create a new design every single time. When you're creating a new design, there's a lot more uncertainty in this. I look at it like driving in the fog. Okay, what do you typically do when you drive in the fog?
You go really, really slow.
You're going to go really, really slow. Now, how many times does your manager say, hey, it's okay to go slow? Slow down. Right? 0. Yeah, it doesn't happen. Right? They say speed up, go faster. Now, let's say your manager is sitting next to you. You're sitting next to him. You're forcing them to drive fast in the car. You're in the car, but your manager's sitting next to you. You got to drive fast. Said, put on the gas, go. What are you going to do? Yeah, you're likely. So given the fact that you're probably going to crash, what are you going to do?
Turn up the radio.
Turn off the radio, so you're going to focus some more. What else are you going to do?
Jump out the car.
Well, so let's say you got to stay in the car. Yeah, you might want to leave that car. But yeah, you're probably going to create some focus, create some transparency, honk the horn, get some radar, put on the seatbelt, right? This is Agile, trying to go fast in the fog. You have a goal, but you're not sure how to get there, right? So what you're doing, you're swerving around a lot, trying to figure it out. This is an Agile thinking, right? It's not easy, but that's the metaphor that I think about when I think about Agile. So this is the Agile perspective. Now let me put this aside. Questions about that before, oh, I just lost my question mark. Questions about that before I jump on to why Agile fails.
Would you say that the length of the line is the cost of the project, the final cost of the project?
That's a good question. Is the length of the line the cost of the project? I don't know if there's a direct correlation. I just look at the length of the line tends to be the uncertainty of what you're working on. And length could be one aspect, cost could be another aspect. Typically complexity, the number one factor of complexity is size. So a longer project tends to fail more often, tends to have more complexity. But it's not the only factor, right? There could be a lot of uncertainty just given the fact that it's a new domain or it's a new technology or other things. Okay, now I've got a second chart here of why Agile tends to fail. and this has come over time of when I work with organizations and the patterns that I see in adopting Agile. Now, a pattern I saw quite a bit over time, especially when I started out consulting, is this concept of what I call thrashing agility. That means I'm trying to become more agile, and that's this dimension. And now how you measure Agile, I think you know it when you see it. But companies struggle getting more Agile over time. Now, one of the causes I saw very early on was we just didn't have much experience. And so we didn't really know what Agile was. And so it worked here, it didn't work there, we didn't understand it. And so early on, I saw a lot of challenges, a lot of thrashing organizations, just not doing it well. But then later on, I actually see a different pattern. Anybody else why you might see this in an organization? Why you might see an organization kind of thrash with, hey, what is agility? How we actually have it work here? May I have a guess?
Maybe we didn't have much materials on how to do this.
So they didn't have enough knowledge, experience. That's one. Yeah, what else?
Reporting habits.
What's that? Bad habits.
Reporting and lack of trust.
Lack of trust, reporting. Yeah, you're getting at some of them. The bigger one I'm seeing actually is kind of funny. We have too many experts. Right? No, we should do Scrum. No, Kanban. No, we should be doing sprints and story points and velocity. No story points, no estimation, right? You get all these experts that think they know Agile and we're successful here, so we bring it here. And now you get 4 or 5 people fighting about what Agile is, right? So you get this concept that we don't really know what makes it work. It's not an engineering practice yet. It's still kind of a pseudoscience, or you might even call it a little voodoo science in terms of what makes it work, right? And that's true. Now, another pattern that I see is this concept, what I'd call kind of this escalating agility that just kind of woo, and it just arcs and peters out. What's happening? What do you think's going on here with a really good, strong start? We usually bring in a consultant. We get some of these people that know Agile. We bring them in. We pay them a lot of money. People like me, etc., to get us Agile. Then what happens? Why does it peter out?
Maybe people try it, say, oh, that's nice, we can do this, and then they say, why don't we come back to what we've done before?
Why would they do that?
Because they don't trust.
Why don't they trust it? Maybe they got some failures.
It's not easy.
It's not what?
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's a lot of like the times where you kind of say, hey, we're Agile. You kind of say, well, I'm fit. Why do I have to exercise? Right? It seems kind of silly, doesn't it? Or I'm healthy, why should I eat well? Right? It's kind of silly, but that's what people do with Agile. They say, hey, we had this Agile initiative, we're Agile. So then we stop. We kind of lose focus on it, and all of a sudden you stop focusing on something, it just kind of deteriorates. Now another challenge I see is the fact that we run into a ceiling. Now I just want to share this a little bit. This is what I call, comes from a concept called outside in. Now, what do I mean by outside-in agility? I mean, and this is actually what we teach. I'm a certified Scrum trainer. Anybody here else train Scrum? Anybody else teach Scrum? Anybody have been into a Scrum Master class? Like certified Scrum Master or Scrum.org or anything like that? Okay, a few of you been to a Scrum class. What do we teach when we bring Scrum in? Do we teach you that it's going to magically make all your problems go away?
No.
Yes? Really? I want to know who that taught you that. If you're taught that, you need to go back and tell them.
Me, not that I'm saying.
I know, but the trainer needs to be fired. What do we teach? It's just the opposite. It's going to make all of your problems worse, just like we talked about up here. It's going to make all those problems that you usually have late, going to all of a sudden come out. And we're going to complain about Agile, right? So when you bring Agile in, like Scrum, and I teach Scrum mostly, when I bring Scrum into the organization like a new process, now we teach Scrum Masters to do what? To bust these impediments. Hey, you got all these impediments, you're going to bust them. The question is, how many? Give me a percentage. What percentage of impediments that a Scrum Master runs into can they actually fix? 50 or 15? 15%. Yeah, on their own. On their own. What percentage of impediments can actually Scrum Masters fix that they run into for their team?
0?
Probably, yeah. Very, very few. Very, very few. Because most of those impediments are what I would call structural. right? They live in the structures, things like roles, responsibilities, departments, and policies, budgets, and finance rules, and all these different things that they have no power to change. So what happens is we start hitting a wall, right? We start hitting this wall, and we can't bust through it, and it's like we just give up. I give up, right? And this is what happens in many organizations is it's coming in here and it's starting to hit a barrier. Now, where does this barrier come from? And let me just explain this a little bit. Most structure is built based on culture. Now, just to kind of humor me for a little bit, and now let me just kind of share what this is think of culture as a set of values. My guess is every company that you're a part of values money. Is that true? You value money. Somewhere in the organization, they value money. Now, think of money as literally a pot of money. What do we do to protect money? In your organizations, what do they do to protect money?
Control.
How do they control it? Do they give you spending limits?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they have people in charge of auditing money? Seeing what you're spending money on. They have a financial organization, audit organization, whole finance departments. We build up roles, responsibilities, policies, metrics. Do we metric money? Oh, you bet we do. There are reports after reports after reports, managing trends of money, incoming, outgoing, all those kind of things, right? That is like a castle built around this little bit of money. Those are walls protecting, like a vault, that value. Now, my guess is also your company protects quality. Most companies value quality. Think of all the structures in place to protect. You're laughing. Why are you laughing?
I alluded to myself.
We'll laugh with you. We put in structures, quality departments, quality policies, metrics to measure quality, right? All of these things that we're putting in place to protect quality. Now think about Agile. Agile's coming in here from the outside saying, let's be Agile. Let's self-organize. We don't need a budget. Let's just inspect and adapt. We don't need a contract. We're going to talk to our customer. Oh, excuse me. We're going to talk to our customer. How do you think that set of values that Agile's bringing in is perceived by this castle?
Brings collaboration.
Barbarian.
You think it brings collaboration? Yeah, it's probably like a Trojan horse or like a virus, right? Because what's happening is you have a set of values inside this company that are built to support predictability, reliability, sustainability of money and quality and all those other ilities you have in your organization. And Agile's coming in and saying, let's play, let's self-organize, let's have these fun teams. And it gets rejected, right? And so what's happening is it looks like it's a bad heart transplant or a bad virus coming into organizations, impeding. And who owns these layers? Leadership. Right? Leadership is the one that owns the policies. And by the way, when I say structure, I also mean things like policies and metrics. They're also structural pieces that drive behavior in an organization, all built around values. Now, how do you fix this? This is why Agile in most organizations starts to go really quickly and then dies out. And then usually we kind of get this bouncing, rolling agility ball over here that says, I just give up, right? It just goes, and I've been in some organizations where we've tried 2 or 3 times. I've heard some people in my classes, we've tried Agile 5 times. Like, I would leave, okay? I would leave.
Change your organization.
Change your organization, yes. Yeah. That's where we're going. That's where we're going to. So, how do you fix this? We got to reverse it. So, here's the perspective. Here's the solution. We have to go inside out. What does inside out mean? Okay, if outside in, that's down here, right? Outside in is blocked, right? Right? This is blocked by structure and culture. What does inside out look like? Well, inside out says we better start with values. We better start with, Agile has a set of values, right? It comes with a set of values, a manifesto and principles and all those things, right? About self-organizing teams and transparency and adaptivity and all those kind of values. If those values are important to us, we need to build Agile structures to protect those values. And then Scrum, Kanban, or whatever it is you want to do Agile-wise will work. It's easy, actually. If you build the right house, the process is really easy. But it's leadership that owns that house. So what I'm not going to say is go in and just change culture. Instead, what I say is align to culture. Now, what do I mean by that? It's understanding who we are. So, for example, if quality is a key value of your organization, do you think Agile protects quality too? Yeah. In fact, it protects it even better. If we look at it over here, right, it's actually a better predictor of quality than traditional approaches. It's a better predictor of predictability. So you can actually align a lot of the Agile values to the things you're already talking about, money, quality, etc., right? But it also values things like collaboration. If you're working in a complex world, we can tie in some of those things as far as how to make better decisions, right? So I'm saying align to culture, but the key point here is, and let me use the word build, we're going to build Agile structures. Now, what does that mean? Craig Larman, does anybody know Craig Larman? Formed something called LESS, Large Scale Scrum. He's got a famous law. He says culture follows structure. So if you want a culture change, if you want a behavior change, change the structure. Give me one example. Had an organization. They had a problem of throw the code over the wall mentality, right? Developers would get it done, throw it over to test. They had a problem with quality, problem with defects, problem with delays, all those things. So what they say? We're going to actually get rid of the test organization. Whoa, why would you do that? Why would you get rid of the test organization if quality is our problem?
So everyone should be responsible for quality.
Everyone. So you think it changed behavior without a safety net of the developers writing code? You bet. Right? If we want changes to behavior, you change the structures. Now that's a radical shift, but you don't have to do such radical shifts. Who here knows what like a say-do ratio is? Anybody hear of a say-do ratio? In a sprint, at the beginning of a sprint, we say what we're going to do, and at the end of the sprint, we do it or not. Right? They call that a say-do ratio. Do you know that some organizations drive and they say, hey, you better have a 95% say-do ratio? Meaning, at the beginning of a sprint, you're going to, by hell or high water, commit to that set of stuff, and at the end of the sprint, you better get it done. What kind of behavior do you think comes from that kind of policy?
You say less.
You say less. We get safe, we pull back, we get conservative, because the team owns what they say they're going to work on, right? Or they lie, cheat, and steal to show the metric, because we know that every time you put a metric in place, we'll achieve the metric, but won't necessarily improve the outcome that we're trying to achieve. This is a policy that can drive healthy behavior or an unhealthy behavior. And finally, we align to culture, we build Agile structures to enable Agile practice. So, summary. Agile is a complex world. Agile is built for a complex world. But in most organizations, it fails, right? It gets blocked. So if you want to sustain and grow agility, right, that's represented by this line. The only way I've found to be effective is to use an inside-out approach. Start working with leadership, start working with the organization itself, start talking about Agile values, and build an organization around agility. Now, in organizations that have a lot of legacy, this is a problem. This is a challenge. This is hard. This is not easy, right? And the problem is in a lot of organizations, when you start taking fairly simplistic, what I mean by simplistic is process layered only scaling practices, they tend to not stick. One of those I'd call Scaled Agile Framework. I don't think Scaled Agile Framework does enough in the structural layer to change an organization to be effective with Agile for the long term. You could get short-term results, not long-term. That's why I would support something more around the lines of large-scale Scrum, because it really goes into the structural elements of the organization. We got to change the organization to actually be effective with Agile. So before I go on, questions about this? And I'll borrow you again to stick that one up. Questions? Why Agile fails?
Why do we say agile or agility?
Why do we say that again?
Possible, but still.
Say it again. I didn't hear the question.
Agile is impossible, but why don't we use it now as agility? I know it's a silly thing, but still.
You know, in our industry, we have little a agile, and big A agile. And little a agile tends to mean the verb, let's adapt. Big A agile tends to mean Scrum, XP, Kanban. Usually means a practice of agile, right? Now, agility, the reason I use the word agility is it gets us away from big agile and gets us down into the verb. And I like the verb because I like the mode of agility and adaptiveness. I could go any different direction on exactly how to do it. Scrum, XP, Kanban, you name your method. I think there's a lot of ways we could be agile. Yeah. Am I repeating the question well enough?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's why I stopped.
Okay, so last piece, probably the biggest part of what I want to talk about is the leading agility mistakes. Now, what it says on here, and you probably can't read this, it says, while most leaders have come to focus on the right, okay, these things over here, agile leaders have come to value the things on the left more. So this is kind of reads like the Agile Manifesto in terms of kind of left and right. And the first one on here that I'm going to highlight is this concept of others. Okay, you think that's kind of a weird thing. Leaders focus on others. I mean, that's what leadership is. A lot of leaders think, well, that's my job. As a leader, my job is to guide other people. Let me tell you a story, right? I have 2 kids, and they're older now, but when they were little, anybody else here have kids? We have people with kids? Some of you were kids? Who was a kid at one point? Okay. Most kids, like to have fun with their brothers and sisters. We had 2 boys. My wife is here with me, and we had 2 boys. And growing up as the kids, they like to, have fun with each other and fight and do all the sorts of fun things. And so one day I was driving in the car with them, and of course, one, bugs the other one. He's like, Dad, Josh is bothering me. And I'm like, okay. Rule number 1, if you're a parent, ignore your kids. That usually solves most problems. Didn't in this case, though, right? So it's like, Dad, Josh hit me. So he's annoyed, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I've got options here, right? I got choices. I could do what my father would do often, which would be like, okay, if I have to pull this car over, you're gonna be in trouble, right? Kind of the stern father. And I thought, well, let me put on the little more coaching hat. Let me think of what would a coach do in this case. And I thought, well, let me ask him, what do you want to do about it? Right, so I said, Matt, what do you want to do about it? And I kept driving. He was pretty quiet, so I figured maybe that was just enough. He needed to think about it, and he keeps crying, Dad, John's bugging me. So I asked him again. I said, what do you want to do about it? And he came back and he said, I want to hit him. I thought. So the good thing was Jana was not in the car with me, so I thought, why not? So I said, sure, go ahead. And then he got quiet again. So I thought, okay, well, that's all he needed was just a little bit of authority to do it, but he actually wasn't going to hit him. They're probably still in their car seats. He's probably only 3 or 4 years old, so he's it's not like he's going to really hurt him, I don't think. And then a few minutes later, there's some kind of whack, and all of a sudden Josh, my older one's crying, Dad, why'd you let him hit me? I'm like, okay, this is working really well. So I said, what do you want to do about it? And he said, of course, right away, he said, I want to hit him. So I said, this is working well, sure, go ahead. So they're fighting in the back, I'm driving, they're both crying, and pretty soon my older son comes to me and they're just kind of saying, Dad, why'd you make us fight? And to me that was like, bingo. That's the time we have a conversation, right? That's the moment of learning, right? When there's an emotion that's worth talking about. I mean, you can talk about fighting all the time, but it doesn't mean anything until they have a real experience. And I think this is true with employees. This is true with people in the office. People are going to fight. People are going to be bitchy. People are going to do all sorts of crazy things. But it's how does the leader show up, right? And this is where I think most leaders make a mistake. And that is they think leadership is about focusing on others when indeed leadership is actually about who you are. Because what happens in most organizations is they reflect leadership. Right? They reflect leadership. And so what we see is, we see the fact that leaders are trying to focus on other people, and then when they operate, so let's just take Agile for example. You know, here we have a leader that's getting trained and learned about Agile. That's great. Now, how many of your leaders have no clue about what Agile means, but yet they go say, hey, go do that Agile thing, go deliver your sprint. We call this hypocrisy, right? Meaning, the word hypocrisy means I'm telling you one thing, but I do something. This isn't for me, it's for you. You know, when I go to a class, I go to a training class, how many times do I see the leaders there? Very few, right? Now, let me tell you a story about Lars. Lars is one of the leaders that I would call is what I call a catalyst leader. A leader that starts with himself. Now, this isn't a selfish start with myself. This is hey, I'm modeling what it's like to be Agile. Lars has been in one of my Scrum, I do a Scrum kickoff for teams. It's a 2-day thing. We do a 1-day exploring Scrum. Another day we actually do coaching where we actually get all the cards on the wall and we build their backlog and do all that stuff, right? Lars has been in that class 7 times. Now, you might ask, is he a remedial student? Is he poor at learning? And you have to recognize, Lars works for a very large research organization. This is a global research organization with hundreds and thousands of people. And their research organization engages with all other parts of the business globally. And every time they do projects, they're working with a different part of the business. So you recognize now, as this group, every time they do a new project, they got to relearn Scrum. But they don't relearn it because they already know it, but they recognize also the rest of the company that they're working with now has to learn Scrum. So not only has Lars done this, but his entire staff of about 40 people have done this, where they've been in my class like 7 times for like the last 7 years. And they come back again and again and again because what they've become is they've become the leaders in the class now. And I just facilitate the class, but they do a lot of the sharing and explaining and communicating. But they don't just say, hey, go do that Scrum thing. They co-create with their clients, with the company they're working with. And Lars sets the example. Let's give you a couple other examples of what Lars is doing. Lars is paired leaders. He did. For about 2 years, Lars did paired leadership. Now, in this large organization, Lars actually promoted somebody below him and said, you are going to be my pair. We're going to work together. We got like 45 people here. I can't manage all this. It's going to make us a lot better if we could actually do this, just like we're asking our teams to swarm, right? Why aren't we swarming? Now, HR called up and said, we can't assign people to 2 managers. Who do they report to? And you think, well, Lars would just say, well, just split them half and half. No, he said, figure it out. And they said, well, we have no way in our system to do this. And so he said, well, do you have children? And she said, yeah. He said, what parent does the child report to? You or your spouse? And I think she got the point, right? That we've done this in parenthood. We've reported to 2 people all the time. We figure it out, right? And so what his point here is that he's modeling the behavior he's looking for in the people that he's working with. And he's done it over and over and over again. And I've had a relationship with Lars and his staff for about 7 years in terms of how they run these Scrum projects. And they do all sorts of fascinating experiments. And what's fascinating about this group is they do a lot of really cool research. Like right now they're researching, anybody involved in 3D printing? Okay, they're doing like 3D printing for like, airplane parts, really high-tech stuff with lasers and cool metals and I don't know, what do you 3D print with?
Prototypes and...
Okay, some prototyping, plastics and things like that. Yeah, they're doing some pretty high-scaled, what they call additive manufacturing work. So one of the fascinating things is the fact that they use a lot of swarming techniques and experiments and all sorts of things, but he leads the way, right? So the first mistake I think leaders make is they think, my job is to lead others, where a good Agile leader starts with himself. Okay, that's mistake number 1. Now, mistake number 2. Questions on mistake number 1? Okay, mistake number 2, skills. Most leaders think that skills are actually the thing they need to develop, or the thing people need to develop, right? Develop new skills, whether it's a new coding program, whether it's a new research technique, whether it's a new, I don't know what you learn in gaming, so I don't, but recognize this, right? As a leader, 80% of managers believe they are supportive of their employees. What percentage of employees you think their managers support them? 25%. Yeah. The studies show the fact that the biggest issue with managers and leaders is not skills. It's awareness, or the lack thereof. That's showing you a prime example of the fact that here we have a leader that's just simply unaware of their ability in engaging other people. I'll give you one example. Myself, I'll use myself as an example again. Okay, I was a father, I'm also a husband. We've been married about 25 years. At one point, I was early in my leadership, and I'm what you'd call an expert leader. So I grew up as who here is a developer, programmer, or was developer, programmer? Okay, that's where I came from, right? I was a developer. Going back and age myself with Smalltalk, I was a Smalltalk programmer, right? So here I am, a pretty darn good programmer, and I get promoted to program or development manager of the team. They say, well, you're a good programmer, you should be able to lead this team pretty well. Of course, that never works. But what do I do? Well, as an expert leader, what am I good at? Well, I'm good at solving bugs, I'm good at designing code. So a person comes into my office with a problem, what do? Well, let's just fix that bug, right? I treat people in my office like bugs to fix. And this is working for me, right? I'm fixing problems, we're getting along, until one day, Jana told me, my wife told me, Pete, stop fixing my problems. It's like, whoa, okay, relationship landmine right here. I just stepped on it. I'm like, wait a second. What? This is what I'm good at. I'm good at solving problems. I do this all day. What else would you like me to do? And what did she say? Just listen. What did you say? Just be with me. Just listen. I'm thinking, talk. What does that do? Listening, that doesn't solve the problem, right? My mindset at that point was, my job is to fix problems. You tell me a problem, I fix your problem. If you talk, I talk, that doesn't do any good. If I just listen, that doesn't do it. The mindset, the awareness of a leader at that stage doesn't understand, may have the skill of listening, but doesn't understand even the need to listen. Give you one example in the real workplace, right? Now, I obviously have learned to listen because she's still stuck with me. So I have developed that skill. I do recognize the power of listening today. And so I'm a very, I've grown a thing or two. Rachel is a woman in the organization who leads other product managers. She's like program level, and she runs like 12 other product managers. Pretty senior person in this organization. And she got some feedback from her manager. Says, you need to be more assertive with your opinion, right? Now, this you might consider this a gender thing, but there's a lot of people actually, in fact, that are what we call over-accommodative. Now, what is over-accommodative? They just believe that I'm a servant leader. I do what the team needs. If they need something, I'll help them, but I'm not going to throw my voice in there if they don't ask for it, right? That's not an effective leadership style. But her manager's saying, no, I want you to be more assertive with the team. So we decided, well, let's get some more feedback. Let's do a 360. Let's actually see what other people say. And she heard the same thing, not only from her manager, but from her direct reports. Her direct report said, we want to hear more from you. And she thought, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And she also heard it from stakeholders. We want to hear more from you. And she thought leadership was about being a servant leader. And so we started talking about this, and I was doing some one-on-one coaching with her, and we were talking through some issues and what you might try. And she stumbled upon some experiments. We started talking about experiments she could try. And she stumbled upon the point that when she sits in a larger room, like a big conference room, meeting room, she tends to sit on the outer edge or in the back. And so we said, well, what would happen if you just change where you sit? What if you sat in the middle? What if you stood up sometimes to talk? What if you got more engaged physically and see what that does behaviorally? And when we talked a few weeks later, and she said, Peter, it was kind of amazing that my behavior changed as I changed where I sat in the room. And so what we recognize in this kind of example is the skill of being active, right? Of talking, of sharing, of giving opinions is there in her. but the awareness of doing it in the right way, at the right time, in the right situation wasn't. And this is what I find with most leaders, is that we focus on skill rather than awareness. And when we focus on awareness first, then we start to see the choices in front of us that will help develop probably skills that we already likely have. So that's problem number 2. So, questions?
Time. I think managers, they do have problem with time to kind of spare for the employees to coach them. I mean, to...
They do or they do not have time?
They do not have time.
Do not have time.
They do have problem with finding time for that.
Why is that? Why do managers not have time for this?
It might be the case of the organization itself, how it operates, but...
Or because they are solving problems.
Because number one, they're an expert leader that are solving the problems themselves. Were you saying something?
No.
Oh,
Bad delegation.
what's that?
Bad delegation.
Bad delegation. Another problem, which leads us to my next mistake. Maybe I'll use it as a segue. I think there's so many organizations right now that have such a high pressure to deliver. Would you agree? Is there a high pressure in most of your organizations to get something out the door this quarter, this month, right? Is there a lot of pressure? What is your focus, by the way, as a leader? What is your product focus, or what are you building something, IT?
Yeah, it's innovation space, but product software development.
Okay, product software development. Do you guys release something fairly frequently, quarterly? Trying to. There's a lot of pressure to do so. Yeah. We're living in a time where the pressures of delivery are more than any other time in the world. I mean, it just keeps escalating, doesn't it? It's not getting worse, or not getting better, it's getting worse. So the question is, time isn't just the leader's time, it's everybody's time, right? There's so much pressure to deliver. And let me just tell you a story about Grace. So Grace is another leader that also felt the pressure, and she's in charge of a product portfolio, and she has only 2 teams, but she has 22 applications that she supports, right? Whoa, that's a lot, right? So we did a lot of fun experiments with her, but let me just share one experiment, right? So she was running one of her Scrum projects, and it was a few months long, and she had to work, and she got some feedback, and it was running in Scrum, right? We should all be aware of what Scrum is. We got sprints, we got reviews, we got stakeholders giving us feedback, we're doing some slight pivots along the way, blah, blah, blah. And then she decided to run an experiment towards the end of the release. And she opened up the review to a bigger audience. And she said, hey, this is what we've been doing. All of a sudden, it's like, what? What are we doing? Why are we doing? All of a sudden, all these issues popped out. And we realized, wow, we are talking to the wrong people, right? And what she realized and what we've realized over time is that what's more valuable, what's more valuable is the ability to experiment over deliver, because what we find over and over again is when we focus on deliver, what we fail to do is we fail to figure out, are we delivering even the right thing? And we wasted a huge amount of effort on delivering the wrong thing. We know that didn't work in a traditional approach. We know that the number one waste in what we build is building the wrong thing, but you know what? We're still doing it in Agile. You're laughing. I see a lot of teams that have the blinders on. You ask them, hey, when are you going to be? I don't know, we're Agile, right? We're kind of doing this, we're swimming around, right? And what happens is they get such a focus on deliver. We never have time to actually check. We never have time to take a break, take a step back, try an experiment, do a test assumption, verify, are we building the right thing? And one of the things that Grace learns now, what Grace does, she no longer does a demo. Now, who here does sprints, by the way? Anybody doing Scrum sprints? Okay. Most of you do a review, like a demo review, something you show at the end of a sprint. Most of that's usually like online. You show up WebEx, here's a few features we worked on this sprint. That's most demos, like say 98% of demos or something like that, right? She doesn't do that anymore. What she does is a reverse demo. She puts the computers in the room. She has the stakeholders walk in and sit at the computers, and she has the rest of the team stand around it. And she says, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do the new feature we just developed. So I want you to go ahead and click on this and start this app and open up this window and start typing this. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, where's that button? What are we doing? And it's fascinating to watch. When you watch the user use the demo, rather than you show them the demo, it's a user experience test right there. So she no longer shows anything. She only does experiments like that, where they start to use it. And then what she does at the end of the demo, at the end of that session, she gets all the stakeholders that were in the app up on stage, and the teams are sitting in the audience. And this is the reverse part now. They get to give them feedback. This sucked, I like this, stuff like that. And they've got to sit and listen to it. In fact, one example where this happened was they were working on this 3-month program, and actually it was a 6-month program, but it was broken in a couple parts, and it was hitting a trade show, and they had to do all this functionality, and they got to one of these feedback sessions. The user sat down in front of the computers. The performance sucked, right? But you'd never see that in a demo, right? They'd hide all that performance stuff, and they got up on stage and said, if you show this at a trade show, nobody's ever going to, the performance was terrible, right? And so that's one of those things that just often isn't exposed when you're just putting lipstick on the pig in a demo kind of construct. So another mistake that we think about leaders make is we get such focus on this time pressure delivery that we don't have time to take a step back. And I think that's a mistake across the board for leaders. It's not just on whether they're coaching individuals, it's how they focus on the products themselves. I agree with you, totally, 100%. Somebody had a question, and I blew you off.
More than the comment.
Yes.
I really do like that. Now, there's a Polish trainer, Tomek Włodarek, you probably know him, and he has this saying that when doing software, when you're doing software, your primary focus is on delivery, that you should probably work in the pizzeria, because that's where the delivery matters.
In the pizza?
Yes.
Yes. That's where, although, yes, they're doing a lot of cool experiments, pizza delivery too, yeah. But yeah, you're right, that our job is not that realm, right? It's a different realm, it's a new product realm. Okay, 3 mistakes. Questions? Comments? Insults? I got that comment, by the way, from, I think, and Jenna, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we did a walking tour in Poland, in Warsaw, and I think it was our Polish walking tour guide that would always at the end say, questions, comments, insults, right? So I picked up on that, I like that. So if you got insults, I'm good with insults too. Okay, so we want leaders to focus on themselves before others because others reflect them. We want leaders to focus on awareness before skills because the skills are only enabled through the fact that I know when to use them. And I need to focus on experimenting before delivering because otherwise I might be delivering the wrong thing. So here's another one. And we already touched on this one, so I'm going to kind of highlight and just talk quickly over it. A focus on behaviors. And what I see by this is we talked a little bit about it at the opening when I started to talk about why, and thanks if you want to raise that up, that'd be great. Why Agile tends to fail, right, is because we focus on Agile as a process. We focus on the behaviors of teams. Wow, that's a great height for my height. Thank you, Lucas. And what we should be focused on is structure. And I talked about this already, that behaviors follow structure. And I showed you the example of when we got rid of the QA department, then engineering played quality differently. Let me give you another example. Sadi is a senior director in a large consulting organization, IT organization. And Sadi is responsible for not only application development, but also application support and dealing with security and a number of other things like many of you probably play in. And during the 2008 financial crisis, they had a big problem. That, number one, they had a quality issue. A lot of their products weren't, their internal IT apps were not very high quality. And number two, they had to dramatically cut costs because the old consulting group was coming down, they were getting less money for IT, and so they had a problem. And so I thought, how am I going to solve this problem? And we had been working with them in an agile way and talking about some various things, and we came upon an experiment that said, what can we do structurally that's going to change behaviors of the way we deal with quality and the way we deal with our projects? And we came upon a solution to essentially, they called it Support 2.0. Now, In the days of the web mashups, something called Web 2.0, do you guys, I don't know if you remember that Web 2.0 days where you're mashing web apps together. This was kind of those times. This is like pre-iPhone times. And what they decided to do is they decided to say, okay, we're going to take our support organization, which is costing us like $12 million a year. This is not cheap, right, to manage all this tier 3 support. And we're going to take our architects, which is also not very cheap. And we're going to actually just mash them together. Because what's happening right now is support has all these problems and they can't fix them. Architecture's creating all these problems that they don't want to fix. And so we said, we're going to create hyper-collaborative architecture support teams that have the complete authority to do root cause analysis on every single defect and fix it. They thought this was going to be a 3-month experiment to solve problems. It turned into a 4-year program that reduced costs from $12 million down to $3 million over the course of that 4 years in support, and completely restreamed and all their programs. Right? It was hugely successful. In fact, this experiment, this structural change in the way they broke these barriers between traditional parts of the organization, dramatically so much changed the way they operated in support that their consulting practice said, we want you to do that for our clients. And so what happened is this IT organization, this global consulting firm, created a new service called digital transformation. I forget exactly what they called it, but basically digital transformation using Agile and this kind of radical approach of digitizing some of the way they operate. And now sell this as a service, right? Created a cost center into a production center, and they took all their great people in IT and threw them out, and now they're consultants. Now we're starting over in IT, but that's another story. But the point was that if you want to change in behavior, the best way at it is to tweak, or in this case, radically shift the structures. Now, they did a lot of other really cool experiments. They got rid of job titles, right? What we realize in most companies is job titles get in the way of collaboration. Job titles created this concept that, hey, I have an architect, I have a senior architect, I have the junior developer, I have a senior developer, I have all these different roles. And you know what happens when you get more roles? They kind of got to go up and down the chain of command. I can only do this piece, I can't do that, I don't have authority. They got rid of all that stuff. In fact, I had one story. One of the guys that used to work for me, Patrick, he was a sysadmin. And he was a great sysadmin for me. And he said, Pete, I'm leaving. I thought, oh crap, you're a good sysadmin. What can I do to keep you? He said, I don't know if you can do much for me. I got a role as an architect. I thought, oh my gosh, that's awesome for you. You're right, I probably can't give you that kind of title here at this organization. And so he left. And about 2 years later, I ran into him and we started chatting again. And I said, hey, how's it going with this company? He said, Pete, it was kind of a mistake. He said, I left because I thought I was going to be in charge. What I found out when I got there is everyone has an architect title. So nothing ever gets done because you got to go through all the architects to make a decision. I thought, karma, yes. So, story. I can't say enough about, as a leader in an organization, if you just try to change people the way they work, very superficial. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound, right? The only way to really make change in an organization that lasts, that's sticky, is to change the structure, change the way people are working together. Okay. Just do a couple others here. Performance. Kind of related to delivery. Most leaders tend to focus on performance. What do I mean by performance? What do you think? KPIs? OKRs, like a Google OKR. Yeah, usually it's some kind of productivity metric. Like, are you getting more, right? I tend to ask that when a leader asks me, hey, is my team performing? Are they performing? Are they high enough performing? I usually ask them, what do you mean? And they usually say, well, I just want to know if they're delivering enough stuff. I don't know. What do you think about when performance? Lucas? Same? Yeah, are they delivering stuff? I'm thinking, okay, that's a good question. I'll usually ask back. I'll say, okay, if we deliver more stuff, but it takes us longer, is that okay? What's usually the answer?
No.
Of course not, right? I mean, delivering more stuff but longer, that's not more stuff, that's less stuff. So it's got to be more stuff and it has to be faster, right? So it's usually more and faster. Then I'll ask them another question. I'll say, okay, if we deliver more and we deliver it faster, is it okay if it costs us more? And what's usually the answer? No. That's no answer because I've got KPIs, I've got performance, so I need it more, faster, and cheaper, right? That's usually what managers think about. And then you ask them what they mean by performance. They usually ask those three things. But then I'll ask them another question. I'll say, okay, if I do that for you, if I deliver more, faster, cheaper, but the quality sucks, is that okay? Right? Now, usually if they're good, they'll say, no, we got to keep the quality the same, and that's say, okay, that's good. But now we're getting into what I call health. Okay? And health is different than performance. Because you ask the next question, say, okay, if we deliver more, faster, cheaper, and we do it with the same or better quality, is it okay if we actually don't do what the customer wants? Right? And these are trick questions, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm really trying to tease out what do you mean by performance? Because usually when they talk about performance, they talk about an output. What do I mean by outputs? Things, costs, widgets, right? Things. When I talk about health, I'm talking about outcomes, quality, value, customer satisfaction, right? These are outcomes. So what's easy to measure is outputs, performance. So that's why usually managers want to measure performance because it's easy to measure, but it's useless. Because if all you measure is performance, it's a short-term gain. What you really have to measure is health, which is really hard to do. Because it's things like customer satisfaction, which is an NPS score, which is a very lagging indicator. It's like quality. How do I know I deliver quality? Well, it takes me a while to get that quality feedback cycle. And you know what? Most managers have moved on by the time that metric is measured, so it doesn't matter. They don't care because it's not on my watch, right? What's on my watch is more, faster, cheaper. So this is the danger. If agile leaders want to focus on the long-term health, not the short-term performance, the outcomes over the outputs. Let me just put that on here. Right? The last outcome I would say is critical. Is, okay, if we want more, faster, cheaper, and we're going to do it with the same quality, and we're going to do it with the same or better customer satisfaction, is it okay if I burn our employees out to do it? And usually I'll ask, does that cost me more? And usually the answer is yes, it will. That's the difference. Now, study after study shows performance doesn't last. Tom Peters, Jim Collins, these are some of the greats in MBA programs, right? Good to Great, The Giants, the number of books, Built to Last, all these MBA books, they focus on performance. And the studies show, McKinsey did a study of thousands of organizations and found for those particular two studies, like Jim Collins and Tom Peters, big names in MBA programs, 70% of those organizations within 6 years were no longer high performing. 6 years, that's all it took, 6 years. And their stalwarts, the people they put in their books, because they've documented them, were no longer high performing. That's not a good stat. So what Collins, Price and another guy by McKinsey studied is they said, okay, if you want long-term sustainability, long-term performance, you focus on health. You focus on quality, you focus on customer satisfaction. They come up with like 37 metrics of health. It's a little complicated, but the essence is outcome orientation. Okay. Give you one example of a real case study that I worked with. Salesforce, anybody know Salesforce.com? Anybody know them? Are they in Poland? Salesforce.com? Do they have an office here? They do? They have an office like everywhere now. I mean, when I started working with them in 2006, they were like, maybe 1,000 people, and I think they're like, tens of thousands of people. They used to have like one office, now they have like 50 offices. They've done like 50 acquisitions. They've grown huge over the last 12 years. Back in 2006, they focused on being the fastest, best product in the marketplace. They had a huge crash. They ran, boom. In 2006, they couldn't deliver product. The whole thing collapsed. The complexity of the system just broke down. They said, we got to change something. So they went out to the industry. They talked to eBay and Amazon and Facebook and Google and all the other people at the time that seemed to be doing well. And they said, what are you doing? They said, we're doing this Agile thing. Okay, we're going to do this Agile thing. So Salesforce said, we're going to do Agile. But you know what they did at that point? They said, rather than being the highest performing kind of product company, we're going to be the best Agile company. What they did is they focused on health, like their employee engagement. They survey their employees and they ask, are you having the best work time of your life? Imagine that question. Are you having the best work time of your life? And that metric went from 49 to 89% over the course of a couple of years through that Agile transition. Right? They also focus on competition, but competitive teams. Right? They bring teams together to compete against each other, and it's a fun competition. It's a rile competition. They kind of egg on each other a little bit. Right? And essentially they create this, like, it's almost like a Roman Colosseum kind of environment. And in the early days of 2006, it would happen in a single room. Now it's virtual. They have a lot of different types to it. But it's the last thing I want to kind of showcase with you here in terms of stories. I mentioned this earlier, destination. A big mistake a lot of leaders have is a focus on the destination. Like, we're Agile, we're done. One of the things that I think is a mistake is that mentality that we're there, that it's done. And I look at agility like health. I look at agility like fitness. You're never done. It's a lifestyle. It has to be a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle change. What's that? Oh, sorry, I thought you had a comment. It has to be a lifestyle change, right? It's a change in behavior, it's a change in habits, it's a change in the way we operate. And I just want to tell you one story about Salesforce that it almost never happened at Salesforce, right? The journey in terms of, oh, you're going to raise it up again. That's good. We're almost done. The journey for Salesforce was pretty difficult. Now today, they're probably one of the most documented, highest performing Agile companies in the world. They've grown 800% in stock price. They've had all these acquisitions. They're doing extremely well. Now, I can't say all that's Agile, but they have an incredible Agile engine that I was even surprised. I was in Hyderabad this past December, and a coach from Salesforce in Hyderabad, which didn't exist back in 2006, was telling stories as if they were back from when I was working with them years and years ago. And I was amazed at how much of their cultural transformation of agility stuck across all these acquisitions, across all these different countries that they're in now, et cetera. And I attribute one to a story back in 2007 when we were in the initial transition. And a lot of teams were actually, there was probably like 30-some teams that started in Agile, and this was a famous all-in. If you read Mike Cohn's book, Salesforce started all-in. Everybody's like, we're going Agile. And everybody's like, next day, we're Agile. And then it was chaos. And then they called me, Pete, we need help. And then I came in and started helping. And some of the teams we got going Agile pretty well. But there was one team that they had concern over, and that was Force.com. And in Salesforce, Force.com was like the architects. This was like the heavy lifters, the engine that runs Salesforce. Everything that goes through the data goes through Force.com. And they said, you know, our stuff's too big. We can't break this down into 1-month chunks. We've got to plan this stuff out. We've heard these stories before, right? And so they said, Pete, go talk to these guys. And I went into the conference room, and I had probably like 15 to 20 kind of senior level people in the room. I'm like, okay, how can I help? They're like, you called this meeting, not us. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm like, all right. Let's talk a little bit about Agile and what we can do in an architectural setting. And I started to kind of share a little bit about agility in their world. And they're like, Pete, you don't get it. We're not really interested. I'm like, well, you just don't understand enough. And I start, explaining. We can do some what we call walking skeletons, tracer bullets, a lot of architectural concepts around, taking thin slices and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Pete, you don't understand our system. And literally, I think I walked out of that room with my tail between my legs, right? I mean, it was like, this is the first time I've been shot down, right, as a consultant. Like, literally shot down. And I'm like, this is bad, right? This is really bad. I'm a few months into this consulting gig. This is probably my second big client that I've had as a consultant. And I'm like, this is bad. If they don't really figure this out, everybody else starts to ask questions. Well, they're not doing Agile. Why should we be doing Agile? And so the one credit, though, I give to is this showcase that we created. We created a competitive event where everybody has to come and showcase what they're doing every month. And their goal was, you can do whatever you want inside that month, but at the end of the month, you got to show working software. That was kind of their alignment. So they gave autonomy inside the month. You could do Scrum, you could do a 1-week sprint, 2-week sprint, 3-week sprint, 4-week. We don't care. You can use Kanban. But at the end of the month, you're going to show working software. And they said, whether or not you're even doing Scrum or Agile or whatever, you're going to show at the event. So here we are at the event. I'm actually sitting in the audience, right, during these events. And this was like a typical demo. Multiple teams would come up and showcase. And this was a fun activity. Like, teams would get like applauses, teams would get like celebratory, a lot of rewards, and you know, not monetary rewards, but like, you know, be praised. And they came up and demonstrated documents, stuff they're thinking about. It was like they got criticized. Like, leadership said, hey, that's not what we're about. Try again. So I thought, okay, they're going to come talk to me now, right? They're going to have to. They got shot down at the public display, but there was no call. You know, and I realized as a coach, I cannot coach somebody else if they don't want to be coached, right? As a coach, I'm at their disposal. And so I could do the only thing I could do. I focused on those teams that wanted to actually do Scrum, and we got them working, and sure enough, we're in the next month, and they're coming back to the demo, and I'm getting a little bit more nervous. I'm sitting in my seat, and they come up and do the same thing. I'm like, don't they learn their lesson, right? And I'm like, okay, certainly they're going to come. Oh, and in fact, in this time, they got booed. And this happened sometimes at Salesforce. They would actually boo, like it was a kind of a riling boo, but you know, kind of like a, you know, that's not, you know, just kind of fun booing. It wasn't like really, you know, but it kind of cut to the bone. I thought, certainly they're going to come ask me again. No, right? So now I'm really nervous as a coach, right? Because we're getting parts, and now people are really starting to ask questions. Pete, why are we focused on Agile when they're not doing it? And you know, we got these dependencies. So I started to get really nervous. But then in the next review, something switched. And the team that was struggling all of a sudden came and created something they call black tabs. And I don't know if you've heard this term. I think the better term in the industry today is something called feature toggles. You've heard of feature toggles? You can turn a feature on or off in a SaaS application. Basically, it's integrated code that's not shown, right? They call it black tabs. But this was a fascinating experiment that the architecture team said, well, if you're going to make us ship something, we're not going to turn it on. I thought, wow, that's creative, right? Here they basically, and they became an enabler. I apologize, my phone is just going off the hook here and I'm getting disturbed by it, so I should turn that off. They created a technology that enabled every other team to be more agile. And over the next few months, it created an infrastructure that says, hey, if we're going to actually do this thing, let's do it right. And created infrastructure to allow, this is where I think the whole, you know, we think about hardware struggling today with agility because of the turnaround times. Software at one point struggled too. But some of these infrastructure we have now, I think are due to this fact that you know, in a company like Salesforce, I look at it as Salesforce is agile today in a lot of part because it was a hard journey that they really worked on to try to get there. Like, they had to earn it. They had to really earn their agility. And I look at that, you know, the thing you probably accomplished, that you feel most accomplished about, was it easy? Probably not, right? It was hard. And I think for Salesforce that's true too. That agile journey was not easy. It was really hard. But it's something I think they're incredibly proud over. And I think, to me, you know, one of the things I think leaders undervalue is just the journey itself and what it takes to actually become agile, and what that means in terms of how do you as an organization live out your values. And what I credit, it wasn't my coaching. And what I realize now is my coaching maybe created a space for this to occur, but it was that leadership accountability, right? To say, hey, these are the values, and I'm willing to stand up for the values. You can do whatever you want as long as you follow these values, right? And they focused on that extremely intently and explicitly, to the point of finding ways to do this. And so it's kind of my last point here is don't expect this journey, right? This magical journey that I described over here of inside out to be easy. It's not. None of these journeys are easy, especially the bigger, the harder, the broader your organization is. These are hard. But what I find is those hard things that you overcome and you figure out, those are the most valuable transitions. So thank you. Questions?
So I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the journey and the
Journey, yeah.
So what if someone will be trying to do the other stuff and will feel that he's at the destination? Like regardless if it is team or organization. So it may feel that the journey ends, that we are there.
Yeah.
How to encourage them to,
Yeah, so the question is, how do you encourage a leader that is focused kind of on, hey, we're agile, we're done, versus the journey? I try to use the metaphors like health and fitness as like, have you ever been on a diet? Right? Are you ever done with a diet, right? I mean, it's that mindset that it has to be something that we're teaching ourselves as a life skill. It's a lifestyle. It's a habit that we have to develop. And one of the things we think about with respect to agility is the habit of experimentation, the habit of trying new things, the habit of transformation itself, the habit of changing structures. Those are habits. And those are, in a sense, the new habits, that there is no, it worked yesterday, so therefore it works today. That just doesn't exist anymore, right? It's changing too fast. So I think, to some degree, I think we have to kind of bring it into metaphors and help people understand what Agile's like, because it's too difficult in itself, I think, to maybe, even for me to explain well. I don't know if that helps. But other questions, thoughts? Yes.
Is it possible, from your experience, to have enough force from this outside-in perspective to crush this?
To crush the castle, yeah. So is there can you get enough force outside in to crush? I look at it a little bit more as to maybe like an erosion of the castle over time. So like with enough rainfall and water rushing against the side of the castle, eventually you break a wall down and then you kind of rush in, or you Trojan horse and you bring the Trojan horse in, and then, so I think there are ways to change outside in. I just haven't seen this be very sticky, meaning it will change and it could even change well for a while, but a lot of the case studies you look at in the industry haven't lasted very long. One of the things that I've tried to pride myself on as a coach is those that have stuck around 8, 10, 12 years, right? And Agile hasn't been around that long. But that means it's doing something that lasts beyond the leaders that are there. And so that's what I might ask you next is, okay, let's say it did that. How long has it been? And is that something that you feel is been, so here's one kind of question I'll use. If new leadership came in and threw Agile out, what would people do? Would they revolt? Right? And if they revolt, that shows you've brought it into the culture. And that's one of the case studies that I was working with, a company that got bought by another company. And they said, oh, that Agile stuff, we're not doing that. And literally there was a revolt of the acquired company, and they basically backed off, said, oh, okay, if it means that much to you, right? And because it had become that important to them, that they would not do it any other way. That to me is one of those indicators that it's worked, and I don't know in your case. I'm not saying it can exist, I haven't seen it as well.
Have you seen any success in introducing agile practices in part of a huge company?
Yes, in fact, that's the only way.
Just a small part,
yes.
And the rest doesn't want it.
So have I seen it work in part of a large company? So think about any really large company, thousands of people. There's no other way to get Agile to work other than piecemeal, meaning we've got to get it to work in one part. So take GE as one example, right? Even GE Healthcare. GE Healthcare was an example where we've got 4,000 or 5,000 people around GE Healthcare, hundreds of products, worldwide, global distribution. The way that started was a small joint venture company that GE was partially in, that we were able to experiment for a year with Agile. And then we said, oh, that looks cool. Then one leader brought it into another division called radiology inside GE that said, all right, let's play with it with these 400 people for another year. And they said, oh, that's working pretty well. Let's bring it into over here where we have like 2,000 people in IT, healthcare. And so And so what we did is we created these bubbles that kind of kept growing, and we kept bumping into more and more of these walls and leadership ceiling every time we'd raise the bubble up. But with really large organizations, I don't think there's any other way. Smaller ones you can go all in, but I don't think larger ones, even if you have the CEO wanting it, to do it effectively, you need pockets, I think.
Thank you. I was asking mostly because of pressure of precise reporting and separation of skills, like the architects you gave. That
Yep.
sometimes in a huge company you just assign, not you, but some people assign that skills to particular team or particular person, and they have to report precisely. That kills the agility.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's any chance just to change it rather than go to a completely different company.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the larger the company, the more complicated those roles are, responsibilities. Give you one example, Staples, we were running, they had a database team of about 25 people, and all the applications had to go through the database. Well, there was this, agreement that said, well, give us your change request, and 2 weeks later we'll give you back a change the data. And that wasn't working with Agile. So we said, could we run an experiment? Could we try, can we put 2 of your database people on these teams? And they said, okay, we'll try that experiment. I love the word experiment, especially for organizational change. And so what happened was these database people were on the teams. They had fun. They're like, hey, wait a second, I get to see what I'm doing. I get to have feedback quickly. And that's the change that sparked the rest of the database team to be kind of diverse into the rest of the organization. They kept a core back for some of the big database stuff. But that's how I find change in organizations to work, is we try it, we get some feedback, and then we can make a bigger structural change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How to find balance between experiment and delivery?
How to find what between experiment and delivery?
Balance.
Balance, yeah.
I know the teams that they can experiment all over time.
Yep. Yeah, and never deliver anything. Well, and then you see those companies that basically, like Google right now, or Amazon and others, they're actually delivering experiments. If you think about it, right, what they're doing is they're delivering, especially SaaS application, web applications. They can deliver A/B testing. They can deliver things. Spotify's doing this. They're delivering experiments, right? If you have a fast enough turnaround time, these can be blended, right? Now, not every industry has that kind of flexibility in terms of delivery. So what is the right balance here? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a magic answer there. I think it's one of those, it will depend on your industry and where you're starting from. And the only thing I'd recommend is maybe a bias towards, right? And we can learn a tremendous amount without delivering. And there's a lot of ways to try to test assumptions in a sense. And I think the whole lean startup mode is around the fact that we're not testing enough before we deliver. That's the whole Eric Ries and the lean startup books are about. Yeah, one last question here.
I'd like to ask about the culture clashes in the organization.
Yep.
Because a lot of companies has their own set of values.
Yes.
And they might be similar to Agile, but they sound different. They are quite different.
Yes.
And when people are communicating those values, which are quite like a religion for employees,
yeah.
and then they might be confused. Should I communicate more like Agile values or more like our own company values? And how to solve this puzzle?
Good question. So yeah, culture clash, and how do we balance the native culture with Agile culture? It gets worse than that, and that is many companies have multiple cultures, meaning acquisition, different locations. Culture is something that gets, like language, it gets localized, right? Departments, businesses, they all have cultures inside the larger company. So not only is it Agile fighting the culture, it's culture fighting the culture. And so go back to Salesforce, we actually identified the culture, and this is something that I do when I'm working with organizations, is we actually take a survey of the culture. And there's tools to actually do this. They're not Agile tools, they're just general culture tools that actually expose. And we realize, okay, R&D has a particular culture, IT has a culture, this acquisition they're doing has a culture, and we're trying to get these groups to work together. Forget agile, just how do we work together, right? And that in and of itself is creating what I'd call organizational awareness, right? They create something fascinating emerged in Salesforce called tops down, right? Meaning one of the behaviors they're trying to change was these managers telling everybody what to do, right? And they tried to change roles. They even split the role and said, okay, you guys no longer have this responsibility, but people are people and they just tell people what to do. So what emerged from that culture conversation was, hey, tops down, meaning we don't do that anymore around here, right? And it was kind of one of those intersection points between agile and our culture that was an alignment of a behavior they were trying to change. And it was a really fascinating kind of experiment, and it just emerged from the system, something we created that I found to be a really interesting. But I guess to answer your question holistically, I think just as leaders need to become more self-aware, organizations need to become more self-aware. And I do that with cultural assessments and other things, but there's probably other ways to experiment with that. So I will leave it at that. For those of you that have some additional questions, I'll be around for a few minutes and can answer those individual questions. But otherwise, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming out on a weekday night and joining us here. So thank you.